The gunshot echoed across the arid landscape as Harriet Palmer ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The stagecoach robbery had been unexpected, a routine journey from Santa Fe now transformed into a nightmare of splintered wood and flying bullets. Clutching her father's pocket watch, the only memento of her former life in Boston, Harriet closed her eyes and prepared for the worst. "Madam, stay down." The voice came from somewhere to her right, deep and commanding. Through the haze of dust and gunsmoke, Harriet glimpsed a tall figure moving with practiced precision, returning fire at the bandits who had ambushed the stagecoach. Glenrio, New Mexico Territory, 1876, was supposed to be her fresh start, not her final resting place. The stranger fired twice more, his accuracy forcing the remaining outlaws to retreat toward the distant mesas. As silence gradually replaced the chaos of gunfire, Harriet dared to lift her head. The man approached her, holstering his revolver with a fluid motion that spoke of years of practice. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the weathered lines around his eyes that had witnessed more than their share of the frontier's harsh realities. "Are you hurt?" he asked, extending a calloused hand toward her. Harriet shook her head, dust falling from her chestnut hair. "No, thanks to you." She accepted his help, rising to her feet with as much dignity as her trembling legs would allow. "I'm Harriet Palmer. I was traveling to Glenrio too." She stopped, realizing how little it mattered now, with the stagecoach driver dead and her luggage scattered across the desert floor. "Dane Yates," the man replied simply. He surveyed the scene, his expression grim. "Those were Riley's boys. They've been hitting stagecoaches along this route for months." Harriet brushed the dirt from her skirts, trying to make sense of her situation. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman, huddled together near what remained of the coach. "What happens now?" "We're miles from anywhere." Dane whistled, and a magnificent palomino trotted from behind a nearby outcropping of rocks. "I can get you to Glenrio before nightfall. It's not safe to stay here. Those men might return with reinforcements." The survivors gathered what belongings they could salvage. The elderly couple would ride double on the salesman's horse, while Harriet found herself lifting her arms as Dane effortlessly swung her onto his palomino. "Hold tight," he instructed, mounting behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back was both reassuring and discomfiting. Harriet had never been this close to a man who wasn't family, and despite the dire circumstances, she felt a flush rising to her cheeks. As they rode across the sun-baked terrain, Harriet learned that Dane Yates was the newly appointed sheriff of Glenrio, returning from delivering a prisoner to Santa Fe when he heard the gunshots. He spoke little of himself, deflecting her questions with practiced ease, but his vigilance never wavered as they traversed the treacherous landscape. "Why Glenrio?" he asked after a long silence, the town still hours away. "Not many Eastern ladies choose to settle in a place like this." Harriet tensed slightly. "My father passed last winter. The family business failed shortly after. I'm to be the new schoolteacher." She didn't mention the scandal that had hastened her departure from Boston, the broken engagement, the whispers that followed her through society drawing rooms. "Noble profession," Dane commented. "Town's been without a teacher for nearly a year. Children are running wilder than coyotes." By the time they crested the final ridge overlooking Glenrio, the sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Below them, the small frontier town sprawled along both sides of a dusty main street. Several buildings boasted new wooden facades, but many were still adobe structures that reflected the region's Spanish influence. It's smaller than I expected, Harriet admitted. But growing, Dane replied. The railroad survey team came through last month. If the tracks come to Glenrio, everything will change. As they rode down the main street, Harriet felt the weight of curious stares from the townspeople. A woman in a fine dress, riding with the sheriff, it would fuel gossip for weeks. She straightened her spine, determined not to show how exhausted and frightened she truly was. Dane reined his horse to a stop in front of a modest two-story building with a hand-painted sign. Widow Holloway's boarding house. Martha Holloway runs the cleanest establishment in town, he explained, helping Harriet dismount. She's expecting you. The stage company sent a telegram about new arrivals. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Goodness gracious, Sheriff Yates. When I heard about the robbery, I feared the worst. Her gaze settled on Harriet. You must be Miss Palmer, the new schoolteacher. Come in, child. You look dead on your feet. Harriet turned to thank Dane once more, but his attention had shifted to a commotion further down the street. Two men were squaring off outside the saloon, their raised voices carrying in the evening air. Duty calls, he said, tipping his hat. Miss Palmer, I suggest you rest up. Glenrio isn't Boston. There are dangers here you might not be prepared for. Those outlaws might have friends in town. Harriet raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting I'm in danger even here? Dane's expression remained impassive. I'm suggesting caution. Until I bring in Riley and his gang, they might take exception to a witness who could identify them. He hesitated, then added, I promise you'll be safe in Glenrio. It's my job to see to that. With those words, he mounted his horse and rode toward the brewing disturbance, leaving Harriet to wonder if his promise was merely professional courtesy or something more personal. Martha Holloway ushered Harriet inside, chattering about hot baths and warm meals. But Harriet's mind remained on the sheriff, his steady hands, his watchful eyes, and the way he'd placed himself between her and danger without hesitation. In Boston, men fought their battles with words and social standing. Here in the West, men like Dane Yates put their lives on the line daily. It was a different world indeed. Harriet's room at Widow Holloway's was small but meticulously clean, with a narrow bed, a pine dresser, and a window overlooking the main street. After a bath that turned the water brown with trail dust, she donned her simplest nightgown and sat at the small desk to pen a letter to her aunt in Philadelphia, the only family member who had supported her decision to leave Boston. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with gunshots, and the sensation of being held securely against a broad chest as they rode across an endless desert. Morning brought the realization that most of her possessions had been lost in the stagecoach robbery. Martha Holloway, proving to be a godsend, provided a simple dress that had belonged to her daughter, now married and living in Denver. It's not the latest fashion, Martha apologized, but it will serve until you can visit the mercantile. It's perfect, Harriet insisted, touched by the woman's kindness. The blue calico was plainer than anything she'd worn in Boston, but somehow it felt right for her new life. After a hearty breakfast of eggs and biscuits, Martha walked with Harriet to the schoolhouse, a one-room building at the edge of town. Inside, it was dusty from disuse, with rows of battered desks facing a teacher's table and blackboard. School term starts Monday, Martha explained. You'll have about 20 pupils, ages 6 to 16. Some can only attend when they're not needed for ranch work or helping at home. Harriet ran her hand along the teacher's desk, already envisioning how she would organize her lessons. This was what she had come for, a purpose, a fresh start. I'll need to replace my books and teaching materials, she said, more to herself than to Martha. "Sheriff Yates rode out at dawn," Martha mentioned, seemingly changing the subject. "Said he was tracking those stage robbers. Asked me to remind you to stay in town until he returns." Harriet felt a curious mixture of irritation and warmth at the sheriff's concern. "I'm perfectly capable of getting yourself shot if those outlaws come looking," Martha interrupted firmly. "Dane Yates doesn't give warnings lightly, Miss Palmer. He's seen too much violence not to recognize danger when it's brewing." Later that morning, while purchasing necessities at the mercantile, Harriet learned more about Sheriff Yates from the talkative shopkeeper, Henry Goodwin. "Been sheriff just 6 months," Goodwin explained as he measured fabric for a new dress. "Town council hired him after our last lawman was killed. Came with quite a reputation, former Texas Ranger, they say. Man doesn't talk much about his past, but he's brought order to Glenrio." "Has he always been so?" Harriet searched for the right word. "Intense," Goodwin suggested with a knowing smile. "The man sleeps with one eye open, lost his family in a Comanche raid when he was just a boy, was taken in by a rancher who taught him to track and shoot. Some say he's hunted down every raider who was part of that attack." Harriet thought of the man who had saved her life, his efficiency with a gun, his watchful eyes, the way he kept his emotions tightly controlled. "That's a heavy burden to carry." "Heavier still when you add what happened in El Paso," Goodwin said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Before Harriet could ask what he meant, the shop door opened, admitting a striking woman in an expensive burgundy dress, her blonde hair elaborately styled. "Miss Palmer," Goodwin said, "allow me to introduce Vivian Crawford. She owns the Golden Palace Saloon." The woman extended a gloved hand, her assessment of Harriet swift and calculating. "Our new schoolmistress. I heard about your misfortune with the stagecoach. Fortunate that our sheriff happened along." There was something in her tone that suggested more than casual interest in Dane Yates, and Harriet felt an unexpected twinge of something she refused to identify as jealousy. "Yes, very fortunate," Harriet agreed politely. "Dane has a habit of rescuing damsels in distress," Vivian continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But don't mistake professional courtesy for personal interest. The man's heart is as impenetrable as a bank vault." With that parting shot, she collected her package from Goodwin and swept out of the store, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume. "Miss Crawford has been trying to catch the sheriff's eye since he arrived," Goodwin explained once she was gone. "So far, he's been immune to her considerable charms. His personal life is none of my concern," Harriet said primly, though she couldn't help wondering what kind of man could resist someone as beautiful as Vivian Crawford. 3 days passed with no sign of Sheriff Yates. Harriet kept busy cleaning the schoolhouse, preparing lessons, and meeting the families of her future pupils. By Saturday evening, she had settled into a routine and was beginning to feel less like an outsider in Glenrio. She was returning to the boarding house after dinner with the town doctor and his wife when a hand grabbed her arm, pulling her into the shadows between buildings. Before she could scream, a dirty palm covered her mouth. Not a sound. A voice hissed in her ear. The stench of unwashed body and whiskey was overwhelming. "You're coming with me, schoolteacher. The boss wants a word with the woman who can identify his boys." Fear paralyzed her for a crucial moment before survival instinct took over. Harriet bit down hard on the man's hand and drove her elbow backward as her brothers had taught her long ago. Her attacker grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to tear away and run toward the main street. She heard him curse and start after her, but before she could scream for help, a figure emerged from the shadows ahead. The glint of a star on his chest was visible in the moonlight. "That's far enough, Perkins," Dane Yates said, his voice deadly calm as he leveled his revolver. "You've just earned yourself a cell next to your friends." The man called Perkins skidded to a halt, reaching for his gun, but Dane was faster. A single shot rang out and Perkins crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder and howling in pain. "Are you hurt?" Dane asked Harriet, his eyes never leaving the wounded man. She shook her head, then realized he couldn't see the gesture in the darkness. "No, he said someone called the boss wanted to see me, that I could identify them." Dane's jaw tightened. "Riley. We caught 2 of his gang, but he's still out there." He finally looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "I told you to be careful." "I was being careful," Harriet protested. "I was walking on the main street, not 10 yards from the boarding house." By now, the commotion had drawn attention. The deputy arrived to take custody of Perkins, and several townspeople gathered to witness the excitement. Dane took Harriet's elbow, guiding her away from the curious onlookers. "This isn't a game, Miss Palmer. These men are killers. Until Riley is caught, you're not safe." "What would you have me do? Hide in my room?" Harriet challenged, her fear giving way to indignation. Dane stopped walking, turning to face her. In the lamplight from a nearby window, she could see the weariness etched on his features. He'd clearly ridden hard for days with little rest. "If that's what it takes to keep you alive, yes," he said bluntly. "I promise to protect you. I intend to keep that promise." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why am I your responsibility?" Something flickered in his eyes, pain, perhaps, or a memory. "Because I was there. Because I made a choice to interfere when those outlaws attacked your stage." He paused. "And because every life in this town is my responsibility, whether I like it or not." They had reached the boarding house. Martha Holloway opened the door, having heard the gunshot, and her relief at seeing Harriet safe was palpable. "Sheriff, you look half dead on your feet," Martha said. "Come in for coffee, at least." Dane shook his head. "Need to question the prisoner. Make sure Miss Palmer stays inside tonight." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but Harriet caught his arm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life. Again." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Try not to make it a habit, Miss Palmer." As he walked away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Harriet couldn't help but wonder what demons drove a man like Dane Yates, and why the thought of him facing them alone left her feeling so unsettled. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Harriet dressed carefully in her best remaining dress for church services, which were held in the schoolhouse until a proper church could be built. She had been invited to Sunday dinner at the home of Judge Wallace and his wife, afterward an honor for a newcomer that Martha assured her was significant. "The judge practically runs this town," Martha explained as they walked to the schoolhouse. "His approval means everything will go smoother for you." The service was led by a circuit preacher who visited Glenrio once a month. Harriet was surprised to see Sheriff Yates slip in just as the first hymn began, standing at the back rather than taking a seat. Throughout the sermon, his gaze regularly swept the congregation and the windows, ever vigilant. When the service ended, Harriet found herself surrounded by mothers eager to discuss their children's education. By the time she extricated herself, Dane was deep in conversation with Judge Wallace near the door. "Ah, Miss Palmer," the judge called, beckoning her over. "I was just telling the sheriff he must join us for dinner. After last night's excitement, we have much to discuss." Dane looked as if he'd rather face a firing squad than attend a social gathering, but he nodded stiffly. "If you insist, Judge." Judge Wallace's home was the grandest in Glenrio, a 2-story affair with a wide porch and actual glass windows. Inside, the furnishings reflected his wife's Eastern upbringing: imported carpets, velvet drapes, and a piano in the parlor. "Miss Palmer, "I understand you're from Boston society," Mrs. Wallace said as they settled in the parlor before dinner. "You must find Glenrio terribly primitive." "Different, certainly," Harriet replied diplomatically, "but there's a vitality here that's quite refreshing." "Refreshing?" Mrs. Wallace laughed delicately. "What a charitable description of our dusty little town, don't you agree, Sheriff?" Dane, who had been standing uncomfortably by the fireplace, looked like a wolf trapped in a henhouse. "Glenrio has its merits, madam, such as outlaws and shootouts in the streets," Judge Wallace interjected with a chuckle. "Speaking of which, what do you make of this Riley character, Yates?" "Think he'll try for Miss Palmer again?" Dane's expression darkened. "It's likely. Men like Riley don't appreciate witnesses who can hang them." "Then perhaps we should discuss protection for our new school teacher," the judge suggested. "The school term starts tomorrow, and we can't have armed guards disrupting lessons." "I've already considered it," Dane replied. "I'll escort Miss Palmer to and from school until Riley is captured. The schoolhouse is visible from my office. I can keep an eye on it during the day." Harriet bristled at being discussed as if she weren't present. "Don't I have any say in this arrangement?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to her in surprise. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I won't have my pupils frightened by having an armed lawman hovering about. Nor do I need an escort like some helpless child." "This isn't Boston, Miss Palmer," Dane said, his voice low but intense. "Out here, pride can get you killed." "It isn't pride," Harriet countered. "It's practicality. How long do you intend to shadow me? Days? Weeks?" "You have an entire town to protect." Judge Wallace cleared his throat. "Perhaps a compromise. Sheriff Yates can ensure the schoolhouse is secure each morning and his deputy can check during the day. As for escorts—" He glanced between them, a calculating look in his eyes. "It would appear less conspicuous if you were keeping company socially. Riley would be less likely to make a move if he believes the sheriff has a personal interest in your welfare." Mrs. Wallace clapped her hands delightedly. "What a splendid idea! The harvest dance is next Saturday. Sheriff Yates can escort Miss Palmer." Dane looked as though he'd swallowed something unpleasant. "Judge, I hardly think—" "Nonsense," Judge Wallace overrode him. "It's the perfect solution. You can protect Miss Palmer without disrupting her teaching duties or advertising that she's under guard." Harriet opened her mouth to protest, but realized the judge's suggestion made a certain sense. "If Sheriff Yates has no objection," she said carefully, "I would be amenable to the arrangement." Dane's jaw clenched, but he nodded once. "As you wish, Judge." The conversation moved to other topics as they sat down to dinner, but Harriet was acutely aware of Dane's discomfort throughout the meal. When Mrs. Wallace insisted Harriet demonstrate her skill at the piano afterward, she felt Dane's eyes on her as she played a simple sonata. "Do you play, Sheriff?" Mrs. Wallace asked when Harriet finished. A flicker of something pain perhaps crossed his face. "No, madam, never had the opportunity to learn." "But you appreciate music," Harriet observed, noting how intently he had listened. "My mother played," he said simply. "Before—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Harriet understood, before the Comanche raid that had taken his family. It was the first personal detail he had volunteered, and something in her responded to that small confidence. As the afternoon waned, Judge Wallace invited Dane to his study to discuss official business, leaving Harriet with Mrs. Wallace, who wasted no time in sharing gossip about every resident of Glenrio, including the sheriff. "Such a tragic figure," Mrs. Wallace sighed. "Did you know he was married once? Years ago in El Paso. His wife was killed during a bank robbery while he was away on ranger business. They say he hunted those bandits for months before bringing them in what was left of them, anyway." Harriet thought of the controlled intensity she'd seen in Dane, the way he kept everyone at a distance. How terrible for him, Indeed, the man has known more than his share of loss. Mrs. Wallace leaned closer. Between us, half the unmarried women in town have set their caps for him, especially that saloon owner, Vivian Crawford. But the sheriff keeps his own counsel. By the time Dane emerged from the study to escort Harriet back to the boarding house, the sun was setting. They walked in silence for several minutes, the tension between them palpable. "You don't have to go through with the judge's plan," Harriet finally said. "I know it was not your choice." Dane kept his eyes on the street ahead. "Judge Wallace rarely makes suggestions one can refuse. Besides, it's a sound strategy." "Perhaps," Harriet conceded, "but I won't have you resenting me for it." This made him stop and look at her directly. "I don't resent you, Miss Palmer. I resent that your life is in danger because you happen to be on that stagecoach. I resent that men like Riley think nothing of killing innocents for a few dollars, but I don't resent protecting you." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment, she glimpsed the man beneath the badge, passionate, determined, haunted by past failures. "I heard about your wife," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." His expression shuddered immediately. Town gossip travels fast. "I didn't mean to pry," Harriet apologized. "It's just, I understand loss too. My mother died when I was 12. My father never recovered from it. When he passed last year, it was almost a mercy." Dane was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then, quietly, "It doesn't get easier, you just learn to carry it." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her, and Harriet felt the weight of his trust. "Yes," she agreed. That's exactly it. They had reached the boarding house. As Harriet turned to thank him, she noticed his gaze fixed on something beyond her shoulder. Following his line of sight, she saw a tall, bearded man watching them from the shadows across the street. When he realized he'd been spotted, the man touched his hat brim mockingly and melted into the darkness between buildings. "Inside." "Now," Dane ordered, his hand moving to his gun. "Who was that?" Harriet asked, her heart suddenly racing. "Jack Riley himself," Dane said grimly. "Get inside and stay there. Lock your window." Before she could protest, he was striding across the street, disappearing into the same alley where Riley had vanished. Harriet spent a sleepless night wondering if Dane had caught the outlaw leader, or if he was lying wounded somewhere or worse. It wasn't until morning, when she ventured downstairs for breakfast, that she learned the sheriff had returned safely but empty-handed. "Riley knows these hills too well," Martha explained as she poured coffee. "But the sheriff set extra patrols. Every able-bodied man in town has been deputized temporarily." Harriet's first day of school proved both challenging and rewarding. Her pupils ranged from shy 6-year-old twins to a sullen 16-year-old boy who made it clear he was only attending because his father insisted. By mid-morning, Harriet had established her authority and begun assessing each child's educational level. True to his word, Dane had personally inspected the schoolhouse before the children arrived, checking windows and doors. Throughout the day, she glimpsed either him or his deputy passing by, maintaining a discreet watch. It should have been reassuring, but Harriet found herself distracted by thoughts of the sheriff, his rare smile, the pain he carried, the surprising gentleness beneath his hard exterior. The week passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her students and settling into life in Glenrio. Each evening, Dane escorted her from the schoolhouse to the boarding house, their conversations gradually becoming less strained. She learned he had a dry sense of humor beneath his serious demeanor, and that he was far more educated than his taciturn manner suggested. "My ranger captain insisted we all read law books," he explained when she expressed surprise at his knowledge of legal precedents. "Said a lawman who doesn't understand the law is just a man with a gun." "Wise captain," Harriet observed. "Did you ever consider becoming a lawyer instead of a sheriff?" A shadow crossed his face. "Once. Before El Paso." He didn't elaborate, and Harriet didn't press. Each small revelation about Dane's past felt like a rare gift, to be treasured rather than demanded. By Saturday evening, the night of the harvest dance, Harriet found herself spending far too much time preparing. She had splurged on a new dress of deep green silk, more modest than her Boston gowns but still flattering to her figure and coloring. Martha Holloway helped arrange her hair, pinning the chestnut waves into an elegant style with a few strategically placed curls framing her face. "Sheriff won't know what hit him," Martha said with a knowing smile. "It's not like that," Harriet protested. "This is merely an arrangement for my protection." Martha's expression was skeptical. "If you say so, dear, but I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Before Harriet could question her further, a knock at the front door announced Dane's arrival. He stood in the parlor, hat in hand, wearing a black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his dark hair. The overall effect was striking, less the weathered lawman and more the gentleman caller. When Harriet descended the stairs, she had the satisfaction of seeing Dane's composed expression falter. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "Miss Palmer," he finally managed, "you look very nice." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, hiding her smile at his understatement. "You're quite presentable yourself." A flicker of amusement crossed his face at her teasing tone. He offered his arm with unexpected gallantry. "Shall we?" The town hall had been transformed for the harvest dance. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, tables laden with food lined the walls, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes as couples twirled across the wooden floor. Their entrance caused a noticeable stir. Vivian Crawford, resplendent in scarlet, watched from across the room with narrowed eyes. Judge Wallace nodded approvingly while other townspeople exchanged knowing glances. "Everyone's staring," Harriet murmured. "Let them," Dane replied. "It sells the story that you're under my protection." Something in his tone made her look up at him sharply. "Is that all this is to you? A story?" For a moment his mask of indifference slipped, and she glimpsed uncertainty in his eyes. What else could it be? Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the mayor, who insisted on introducing Harriet to several prominent citizens. For the next hour, she circulated through the crowd, always aware of Dane's watchful presence nearby, though he rarely joined her conversations. When the musicians struck up a waltz, Dane appeared at her side. "May I have this dance, Miss Palmer?" Harriet placed her hand in his, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach as his other hand came to rest at her waist. "I wasn't sure you danced, Sheriff." "I'm full of surprises," he replied, guiding her into the steps with unexpected grace. As they moved across the floor, Harriet became increasingly aware of the strength in his hand at her waist, the scent of him soap and leather, and something uniquely Dane, and the way other dancers seemed to fade into a blur around them. "Where did you learn to waltz?" she asked, needing to break the charged silence between them. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Army officers' ball years ago. I was providing security. A kind general's wife took pity on me and gave me a quick lesson. She taught you well. I'm a quick study." His eyes held hers. "Just like I've been studying you, Harriet Palmer." Her breath caught at his use of her first name. "What have you learned?" "That you're braver than you let on. That you care deeply for those children you teach. That you're running from something in Boston just as surely as Riley is running from the law." Harriet missed a step, but Dane's steady hand kept her from faltering. "That's perceptive of you. Part of my job is reading people." His voice lowered. What I can't figure out is why a woman like you, educated, refined, would choose a hardscrabble town like Glenrio. The music was drawing to a close. Harriet knew she should keep her secrets, maintain the careful distance between them, but something in his gaze compelled honesty. "I was engaged," she admitted, "to a man my father's business partner chose. When father died and the business failed, my fiancé discovered his affections were directly proportional to my family's finances. The broken engagement caused quite the scandal." Dane's hand tightened slightly on her waist. His loss. The simple words warmed her more than any flowery compliment could have. As the music ended, they stood for a moment, still in the dance position, something unspoken passing between them. The spell was broken by Vivian Crawford, who materialized at Dane's elbow. "Sheriff, you promised me a dance, remember? Or are you too busy with our schoolmistress to honor your commitments?" Dane's expression cooled instantly. "I made no such promise, Miss Crawford. Didn't you?" At the Founders' Day celebration, Vivian pouted prettily. "Perhaps I misunderstood." Harriet stepped back, giving him a gracious out. "Please don't let me keep you, Sheriff. I should check on the refreshment table anyway." Before either could respond, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the hall. Dane's deputy burst in, his face flushed with exertion. "Sheriff, Riley's men have been spotted at the Sanderson ranch. They've taken hostages." The room erupted in worried murmurs. Dane was already moving, all traces of the genteel dance partner replaced by the efficient lawman. "How many?" he demanded. "4 men, maybe 5, the deputy reported. "They're holed up in the main house with the Sanderson family." Dane turned to Harriet, his expression grave. "Stay here. Don't leave until I return." To the deputy he added, "Get every available man. We ride in 10 minutes." "I'm coming with you," Judge Wallace announced, already reaching for his coat. "And me," added Dr. Miller. "There may be wounded." In minutes, a posse had formed. Harriet watched as Dane checked his weapons with methodical precision. When he looked up and their eyes met across the room, she saw resignation and something else, regret, perhaps, for the moment that had been interrupted. With a single nod in her direction, he strode out, followed by the hastily assembled posse. The dance dissolved into anxious clusters of people discussing the situation. Harriet found herself beside Martha Holloway, who looked unusually troubled. "The Sanderson place is nearly an hour's ride," Martha said quietly. "And Tom Sanderson has 3 young children." Vivian Crawford joined them, her beautiful face tight with worry. "This is a trap," she said bluntly. "Riley's too smart to be caught at our ranch when he could disappear into the hills." Harriet felt a chill of realization. "He's drawing the sheriff away from town, away from me." Vivian's eyes widened slightly. "You're sharper than you look, schoolteacher." "We need to alert someone," Harriet said, already moving toward the door. "Everyone who could help just rode out with the sheriff," Martha pointed out. Harriet paused, thinking rapidly. "Then we need to protect ourselves." To her surprise, Vivian nodded in agreement. "My bartender keeps a shotgun behind the counter, and I'm a better shot than most men in this town." The unlikely allies hurried from the town hall, Martha Holloway following close behind. They had just reached the main street when a rider appeared at the far end, silhouetted against the rising moon. Even at a distance, Harriet recognized the distinctive hat and broad shoulders of Jack Riley. "Inside," Vivian hissed, pulling Harriet toward the Golden Palace Saloon. "Now." They slipped through the side entrance as Riley and 2 companions rode slowly down the main street. The saloon was nearly empty, most men having joined the posse or gone to the dance. Vivian's bartender, a mountain of a man named Rufus, looked up in surprise as they entered. "Ladies, thought you'd be at the dance." "Get the shotgun, Rufus," Vivian ordered. "Riley's in town." Without questioning, the bartender reached beneath the bar and produced a well-maintained shotgun which he handed to Vivian. From a drawer, he retrieved a revolver for himself. "What's the plan?" he asked. Vivian looked at Harriet. "Riley wants you. What do you suggest?" Harriet felt the weight of their expectant gazes. She was a schoolteacher, not a strategist, yet somehow she had become the center of this dangerous game. "We need to get word to the sheriff," she decided. "Can anyone ride out to the Sanderson ranch?" Rufus shook his head. "They'd be seen leaving town. Riley's boys are probably watching all the roads." Martha, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "There's another way. The telegraph office. If we can get a message to the station at Tucumcari, they could send riders to intercept the sheriff." "The telegraph office is dark," Rufus pointed out. "Operator went to the dance." "But I know how to send a basic message," Martha said. "My late husband was a telegrapher during the war. I picked up enough to manage an emergency." Harriet looked at the older woman with newfound respect. "Can you get there without being seen?" "There's a back way through the alleys," Martha confirmed. "But I'll need a diversion to make sure Riley's attention is elsewhere." Vivian smiled grimly. "I can provide that. Riley's been in my saloon before. He has an eye for entertainment." Harriet realized what she was suggesting. "No, it's too dangerous. He's looking for me, not you." "Which is why he won't suspect me of anything," Vivian countered. "Besides, I've handled worse men than Jack Riley." Before Harriet could argue further, the front doors of the saloon swung open. A man entered, not Riley, but one of his companions, a wiry individual with a scar across his cheek. "Evening, ladies," he drawled, his hand resting casually on his gun. "Mighty quiet in here tonight." Vivian transformed instantly, sliding the shotgun beneath the bar and adopting a sultry smile. "Dance night, sugar. All the respectable folks are at the town hall." She sauntered toward him, every movement calculated to distract. "What can I get you?" While Vivian occupied the outlaw, Martha slipped out the back door. Harriet remained frozen, uncertain what to do next. Rufus leaned close, whispering, "Storage room. Behind the bar. Lock yourself in." Heart pounding, Harriet edged toward the bar, trying to stay out of the outlaw's line of sight. She had nearly reached the storage room door when the front entrance burst open again, and Jack Riley himself strode in. He was taller than she remembered, with a thick beard and cold eyes that missed nothing. His gaze swept the room, landing on Harriet with predatory recognition. "Well, well," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "The schoolteacher with the good memory. Just the lady I've been looking for." Vivian stepped between them, her posture deliberately provocative. "Jack Riley. Haven't seen you in these parts since that business in Santa Fe." "Still have a price on your head." Riley spared her a brief glance. "Step aside, Vivian. My business is with Miss Palmer here." "What business could you possibly have with our schoolteacher?" Vivian challenged, buying time. "She saw my boys' faces during that stage holdup," Riley said, his hand moving to his gun. "Got 2 of them locked up because of her testimony. That makes her a problem." Harriet straightened her spine, fear giving way to a strange calm. "If you harm me, Sheriff Yates will hunt you down." "You know that." Riley laughed, a chilling sound. "Sheriff Yates is chasing shadows at the Sanderson place. By the time he realizes it's a wild goose chase, you and I will be long gone." His smile faded. "Or maybe you won't be going anywhere at all. Depends on how reasonable you're willing to be." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Harriet stated firmly. "Brave words," Riley mocked. He gestured to his companion. "Clem, bring the horses around. We're taking the lady for a ride." As Clem moved toward the door, a shotgun blast shattered the night, followed by shouts and the thunder of approaching hooves. Riley whirled, his gun drawn. What the hell? The saloon doors burst open once more, but this time it was Dane Yates who stood in the entrance, his revolver aimed squarely at Riley's chest. "Drop it, Riley," he ordered, his voice deadly calm. "It's over." Riley's face contorted with rage. Did you really think I'd leave town unprotected?" Dane's gaze flicked briefly to Harriet, relief evident in his eyes before his focus returned to the outlaw. "I left half my men hidden. The moment you showed your face in Glenrio, I knew." For a tense moment, Riley seemed to consider his options. Then, with lightning speed, he grabbed Harriet, pulling her against him as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. "Back off, Yates," he snarled, "or the schoolmarm gets a bullet." Time seemed to slow for Harriet. She felt the cold metal against her skin, smelled Riley's sour breath, saw the flash of something dangerous in Dane's eyes, not fear, but a cold fury that transformed his face. "You won't make it out of town alive if you harm her," Dane said, each word precise and measured. "Maybe not," Riley conceded, "but neither will she. Now lower that gun." Harriet met Dane's gaze steadily, trying to convey a message with her eyes. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, understanding what she intended to do. In one fluid motion, Harriet drove her elbow into Riley's stomach and dropped to the floor. The moment she was clear, Dane fired. Riley's shot went wild, splintering the bar above Harriet's head as he staggered backward, a red stain blooming on his shoulder. Before the outlaw could recover, Rufus leapt over the bar and tackled him, sending his gun skittering across the floor. Within seconds, Dane's deputies had swarmed in, subduing both Riley and his companion. Dane crossed the room in 3 long strides, helping Harriet to her feet. His hands gripped her shoulders as his eyes searched her face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, suddenly trembling with delayed reaction. "No, I'm fine." Without warning, Dane pulled her against his chest, his arms encircling her protectively. Harriet felt his heart hammering, betraying the fear he had controlled so perfectly during the confrontation. "I thought I'd be too late," he murmured against her hair. She allowed herself to lean into his strength for a moment before pulling back to look at him. "How did you know it was a trap?" A rare smile touched his lips. "Because I know you, Harriet Palmer, and I knew Riley would come for you, so I split my forces half to the Sanderson ranch in case it was legitimate, half concealed around town." "Martha went to telegraph Tucumcari," Harriet remembered suddenly. "Smart woman," Dane said with approval, "but unnecessary. I never left Glenrio." Vivian Crawford approached, the shotgun still in her hands. For once, her expression held genuine respect as she looked at Harriet. "Quick thinking, schoolteacher." Not many would keep their wits with a gun to their head. "I had help," Harriet acknowledged, including both Vivian and Rufus in her grateful glance. As Riley was hauled away, cursing and bleeding, the townspeople began to filter back into the saloon, eager to witness the aftermath of the excitement. Judge Wallace clapped Dane on the shoulder, congratulating him on Riley's capture. "Fine work, Sheriff. This town owes you a debt of gratitude." Dane shook his head. "Miss Palmer is the one who deserves the credit. Her courage gave me the opening I needed." The judge's gaze moved between them speculatively. "Indeed. Well, it seems our schoolteacher is full of surprises." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Riley and his remaining gang members were locked in the town jail, awaiting transfer to the territorial prison. Harriet gave her official statement to Judge Wallace, who served as circuit magistrate, and returned to her teaching duties. To her surprise, Dane continued to escort her to and from school each day, though the threat that had necessitated such protection was now behind bars. "Is this still part of your official duties, Sheriff?" she asked on the 3rd evening as they walked slowly along the twilight-bathed Main Street. Dane's expression was uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you prefer I stop?" "I didn't say that," Harriet replied carefully. "I merely wondered at your motivation." They had reached the boarding house steps. Dane stopped, turning to face her fully. The setting sun cast long shadows across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. "My motivation," he repeated slowly. "I think you know what that is, Harriet." Her heart quickened at his use of her first name. "Do I?" "From the moment I saw you behind that overturned wagon, something in me shifted." He seemed to struggle with the words, a man unaccustomed to revealing his inner thoughts. "I promised to protect you from harm. It was my duty. But somewhere along the way it became more than duty." Harriet took a step closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "What did it become, Dane?" He drew a deep breath. "A need to see you safe, to see you smile, to be the man who brings that smile to your face." His voice dropped lower. "I've lost everyone I've ever cared about, Harriet. I told myself I wouldn't risk that pain again. But you've made me question everything I thought I knew about myself." "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly, reaching up to touch his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. "No." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not homesick for Boston society. Boston has nothing I want." Her gaze held his steadily. "Everything I need is here in Glenrio." Something fierce and tender flashed in his eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Dane lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with banked passion. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Harriet wound her arms around his neck, returning his kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Dane rested his forehead against hers. "I should apologize for that," he murmured, "but I'm not sorry." Harriet laughed softly. "Nor am I." The creak of the boarding house door interrupted them. Martha Holloway stood in the doorway, trying and failing to hide her pleased smile. "Supper's getting cold, Miss Palmer. Sheriff, you're welcome to join us if you've finished your discussion." Dane cleared his throat, stepping back reluctantly. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, I'd be honored." As they entered the boarding house together, Harriet sensed a new chapter beginning not just for her, but for the solitary lawman who had saved her life and, in doing so, found something worth living for beyond duty and old vengeance. Over the following months, Glenrio flourished. The railroad survey team's favorable report led to construction beginning on a spur line that would connect the town to the main route. New businesses opened, and families moved in, swelling Harriet's classroom to capacity. Dane Yates remained sheriff, his reputation enhanced by the capture of Jack Riley and his gang. But those who knew him well noticed subtle changes. He smiled more frequently, participated in town events without having to be coerced, and could often be found in the schoolhouse after hours, helping Harriet grade papers or repair desks. Their courtship progressed steadily, much to the delight of the townspeople, who had taken a proprietary interest in the romance between their sheriff and schoolteacher. Even Vivian Crawford grudgingly gave her blessing, though she soon after sold the Golden Palace and moved to Denver, claiming Glenrio had become too respectable for her tastes. On a crisp autumn evening one year after Harriet's arrival in Glenrio, Dane took her riding in the hills overlooking the town. They dismounted at a scenic overlook, spreading a blanket on the ground to watch the sunset paint the desert in brilliant golds and purples. "I come here sometimes," Dane admitted, "when the weight of the badge gets too heavy. It reminds me there's beauty in this harsh land." Harriet leaned against his shoulder, savoring the comfortable silence between them. "It is beautiful. I never thought I'd love the desert, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Dane shifted, reaching into his pocket. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He produced a small velvet box, worn at the edges from being handled often. Harriet's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple gold band with a single modest diamond. "It was my mother's," Dane explained, his voice rough with emotion. "The only thing I have left of her. The Comanche who took me captive after the raid kept it, strangely enough. When I was eventually rescued and placed with a foster family, they returned it to me." "Dane," Harriet whispered, touched beyond words at the significance of the gift. He took her hand, his eyes holding hers with unwavering intensity. "Harriet Palmer, I've spent most of my life alone, carrying the ghosts of those I couldn't save. I never thought I'd find peace, let alone happiness. Then you stepped off that stagecoach and into my life." He smiled ruefully. "Or rather, I pulled you from behind that wagon." She returned his smile, tears gathering in her eyes. "Best rescue of my life. I promised to protect you from harm," he continued, "but the truth is, you're the one who saved me from my past, from my solitude, from myself." He drew a deep breath. "I love you, Harriet. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Harriet felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way she had never experienced before. The journey from Boston socialite to frontier schoolteacher had been unexpected, fraught with danger and loss. But it had led her to this moment, to this man who had proven that even the most wounded heart could heal with the right care. Their wedding 3 weeks later was a town-wide celebration. Judge Wallace performed the ceremony in the newly completed church, with Martha Holloway standing as Harriet's matron of honor and the deputy as Dane's best man. Every resident of Glenrio attended, along with visitors from neighboring settlements, all eager to witness the union of their respected sheriff and beloved schoolteacher. Harriet wore a dress of ivory silk, ordered from Santa Fe, with her mother's lace veil. Dane, resplendent in a new black suit, waited at the altar with an expression of barely contained wonder, as though he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. When Judge Wallace pronounced them husband and wife, and Dane gathered Harriet into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple, the cheers from the congregation nearly raised the church roof. The newlyweds moved into a small house on the edge of town, which Dane had been secretly renovating for months. With Harriet's touch, it soon became a warm, inviting home, a sanctuary for both of them after their respective days of teaching children and keeping the peace. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Dane continued as sheriff, but delegated more responsibilities to his deputy, allowing him time to assist with community projects and even occasionally substitute teach when Harriet was ill. Harriet expanded the school curriculum, started a town library, and began teaching adult literacy classes in the evenings. A year into their marriage, Harriet discovered she was expecting their first child. Dane's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for, joy mingled with protective concern, and a hint of anxiety that he soon channeled into building a cradle and child-proofing their home months before it was necessary. "What if I'm not good at this?" he confessed one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "My own father died when I was so young. I hardly remember him." Harriet covered his hand with hers. "You are the most caring, honorable man I know, Dane Yates. Our child will be blessed to have you as a father." His expression softened. "How do you always know what to say to chase away my doubts?" "The same way you always know when I need protecting," she replied, kissing him gently. "I see your heart, just as you see mine." Their son, Samuel Thomas Yates, was born on a stormy spring night, with the town doctor attending and Martha Holloway assisting. Dane paced the hallway until the newborn's first cry rang out, then burst into the room to find Harriet exhausted but radiant, cradling their child. When she placed the tiny bundle in his arms, Dane's hands, so sure with a gun or breaking a wild horse, trembled slightly. He gazed down at his son's face with an expression of pure awe. "He has your eyes," he whispered. "And your chin," Harriet added with a tired smile. "God help us if he inherits your stubbornness." Dane laughed softly, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Our son, I never thought I'd say those words." He looked at Harriet, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you for giving me this family. For believing I could be more than just a man with a badge and a gun." "You were always more," Harriet assured him. "You just needed someone to remind you of that." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler to spirited young boy, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Martha Yates, whose arrival coincided with Glenrio's transformation into a proper town with a mayor, town council, and most significantly a railroad station that brought regular commerce and travelers. Dane eventually hung up his sheriff's badge, passing the responsibility to his trusted deputy. With his law enforcement days behind him, he turned his attention to ranching, purchasing a modest spread outside town where he raised horses and cattle. Harriet continued teaching until their third child was born, then devoted herself to raising their growing family and organizing the town's educational initiatives. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the town held a celebration in their honor, recognizing the couple's contributions to Glenrio's growth and prosperity. During the festivities, Judge Wallace, now elderly but still sharp-witted, raised a toast. "To Sheriff Forgive Me, Mr. Yates and Mrs. Yates." When you arrived in our little settlement, Harriet, few of us could have predicted how profoundly you would change not just our stern lawmen, but our entire community. And Dane, you promised to protect this fine lady from harm, but I believe we all know it was she who truly saved you. As applause filled the town hall, Dane took Harriet's hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band he had placed there a decade earlier. "The judge is right, you know," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "You did save me." Harriet smiled up at the man who had transformed from the solitary, haunted sheriff to a loving husband and father. The ghosts of his past hadn't vanished entirely. There were still nights when he woke from nightmares of past losses, but he had learned to live with them, to find joy despite them. "We saved each other," she corrected gently, "and continue to do so every day." Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast New Mexico sky, Dane wrapped his arms around Harriet from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About leaving Boston? About choosing this life?" Harriet turned in his embrace to face him, noting the silver now threading through his dark hair, the laugh lines that had joined the ones carved by hardship and worry. She traced his features with gentle fingers, still moved by the way he leaned into her touch after all these years. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step of my journey led me here, to you, to our children, to this life we've built together. How could I regret that?" Dane smiled, that full, unguarded smile that had once been so rare but now came easily and often. "I love you, Harriet Yates, more today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow." As they sealed the promise with a kiss beneath the star-filled New Mexico sky, Harriet reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her to this moment. A stagecoach robbery, a solemn promise from a duty-bound sheriff, and the courage to look beyond a man's carefully constructed defenses to the wounded heart beneath all had converged to create this life filled with love, purpose, and belonging. In the wilderness of the West, she had found not just a home, but a soul that complemented her own, a man who had promised to protect her from harm, while she, in turn, had protected him from the demons that had nearly consumed him. Together, they had forged something stronger than either could have created alone. A family, a legacy, and a love that would endure long after the frontier had faded into history.